Before we begin, if you're finding peace through these sessions, we'd love for you to take a moment, when you're awake, of course, to leave a review and subscribe on whatever channel you're listening on. Your support helps others discover this space and join our journey to restful sleep. Welcome to Slothful Slumber, the podcast where we transform the vast knowledge of the internet into a gentle lullaby for your mind. I'm your host, Luna Dreamwell, and I'm here to guide you on a journey to tranquility through the soothing cadence of Wikipedia articles. Each episode will delve into the most wonderfully mundane and sleep-inducing topics, helping you drift off into a realm of serene dreams. So find your comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the dull hum of information carry you into a restful slumber. This Wikipedia article is titled White Sea-Baltic Canal. The White Sea-Baltic Canal, Russian Belomorsko-Baltijski Canal, often abbreviated to White Sea Canal, Belomor Canal, is a man-made ship canal in Russia, opened on the 2nd of August, 1933. It connects the White Sea in the Arctic Ocean with Lake Onega, which is further connected to the Baltic Sea. Until 1961, it was called by its original name, the Stalin White Sea-Baltic Canal, Belomorsko-Baltijski Canal imeni Stalina. The canal was constructed by forced labor of Gulag inmates, beginning and ending with a labor force of 126,000. Between 12,000 and 25,000 laborers died according to official records, while Anne Applebaum's estimate is 25,000 deaths. The canal runs 227 kilometers, 141 miles, partially along several canalized rivers and Lake Vigozero. As of 2008, it carries only light traffic of between 10 and 40 boats per day. Its economic advantages are limited by its minimal depth of 3.5 meters, 11.5 feet, inadequate for most seagoing vessels. This depth typically corresponds to river craft with deadweight cargo up to 600 tons, while useful seagoing vessels of 2,000 to 3,000 deadweight tons typically have drafts of 4.5 to 6 meters, 15 to 20 feet. The canal was originally proposed to be 5.4 meters, 17.7 feet deep. However, the cost and time constraints of Stalin's first 5-year plan forced the much shallower draft. Waterway. The total length of the waterway is 227 kilometers, 141 miles, of which 48 kilometers, 30 miles, are man-made. The current flows north from Lake Onega to the White Sea, and all navigation marks are set according to it. Once in Lake Onega, ships can exit the southwest shore through the Svir River and its 2 locks to reach Lake Ladoga and then proceed down the Neva River to St. Petersburg and the Baltic Sea. Alternatively, from Lake Onega, river ships can sail eastward into the Volga-Baltic waterway. Route. The canal begins near Povanets settlement in Povanets Bay of Lake Onega. After Povanets, there are 7 locks close together, forming the Stairs of Povanets. These locks are the southern slope of the canal. The canal summit pond at 103 meters elevation is 22 kilometers, 14 miles long between locks number 7 and 8. The northern slope has 12 locks numbered 8 to 19. The route of the northern slope runs through 5 large lakes, Lake Makozero between locks 8 and 9, Lake Vaigozero between locks 9 and 10, Lake Palagorka between locks 10 and 11, Lake Voitskoye between locks 11 and 12, and Lake Matkozhnya between locks 13 and 14. The canal empties out into the Soroka Bay of the White Sea at Belomorsk. The settlements of Povinets, Segezha, Nadvoitsy, Sosnovets, and Belomorsk are located along the canal. Sailing conditions. Minimum lock dimensions are 14.3 meters, 47 feet, wide by 135 meters, 443 feet long. The navigable channel is 36 meters, 118 feet wide, and 3.5 meters, 11.5 feet deep, with a radius of curvature of 500 meters, 1,640 feet. Speed is limited to 8 kilometers per hour, 4.3 knots, 5 miles per hour in all artificial portions. In conditions of low visibility, less than 1 kilometer, navigation is halted. For the navigation seasons of 2008 to 2010, the canal locks were scheduled to operate from the 20th of May to the 15th to the 30th of October, giving 148 to 163 navigation days per year. Construction. The Soviet Union presented the canal as an example of the success of the first 5-year plan. Its construction was completed 4 months ahead of schedule, though it was too shallow for the planned use. The canal was constructed in 20 months, between 1931 and 1933, almost entirely by manual labor. The canal was the first major project constructed in the Soviet Union using forced labor. Belbaltlag, the directorate of the BBK camps, managed the construction, supplying a workforce of an estimated 100,000 convicts at the cost of huge casualties. Although prison labor camps were usually kept secret, the White Sea Canal was a propaganda showcase of convicts reforging themselves in useful labor. Soviet concept of Parakovka, reforging or rehabilitation. Marshall Berman states that the canal was a triumph of publicity, but if half the care that went into the public relations campaign had been devoted to the work itself, there would have been far fewer victims and far more development. Organization and management. The workforce for the canal was supplied by the Belbaltlag Camp Directorate, White Sea Baltic Corrective Labor Camp Directorate, WSBC, of the OGPU Gulag, P.F. Alexandrov, Acting Chief of WSBC, January 16, 1932, Full Chief from March 28, 1932, to at least January 15, 1933. Matvey Berman, head of the Gulag during most of the 1930s, direct supervisor of Firin. Semyon Firin, chief of construction, also mentioned in 1933, documents as chief of WSBC. Naftali Frenkel, chief of works, November 16, 1931, to the end of construction. Lazar Kogan, chief of the BBK Construction Directorate. Yakov D. Rappaport, deputy chief of the BBK Construction Directorate. Edward Fa Senkevich, chief of WSBC, November 16, 1931, January 16, 1932. Also assistant chief of the BBK Construction Directorate. Genrik Yagoda, deputy chairman of the OGPU, as well as Berman, Firin, Kogan, and Rappaport, were awarded the Order of Lenin for the completion of the canal by the Politburo on July 15, 1933. Working conditions. The Soviets portrayed the project as evidence of the efficiency of the Gulag, supposedly reforging class enemies, political prisoners, through corrective labor. The working conditions at the BBK camp were brutal, with the prisoners given only primitive hand tools to carry out the massive construction project. The mortality rate was about 8.7%, with many more sick and disabled. The workforce was organized into brigades of 25 to 30, which made up phalanges of 250 to 300. There were norms for labor, for example, 2.5 cubic meters, 3.3 cubic yards of hand-dug stone per day per brigade. There was an extensive system of incentives for prisoners in place. The food rations for prisoners who exceeded quotas were increased. Those who fulfilled and exceeded the norm, 2.5 cubic meters per day for earthworks, received an increased bread ration, up to 1,200 grams. A bonus dish, for example, 75-gram pies with cabbage or potatoes, and a cash bonus. Moral incentives were also used, presenting the brigade or phalange with a red banner, declaring gratitude, presenting certificates, placing the names of shock workers on the honor board, as well as counting 3 working days for 5 days of work, and for shock workers, a day in 2. At other times, these teams were pitted to compete against each other in surpassing the norms, and promises were made of shortened sentences, food and cash bonuses for the champions. After the successful construction, 12,484 prisoners were freed as reward, and 59,516 prison terms were shortened. In 1931, 1,438 died. In 1932, 2,010 died, and in 1933, 8,870 died, which was due to a reduction in supplies because of famine in the country and the rush before the completion of construction, while Anne Applebaum's estimate is 25,000 deaths. The Canal and Russian Writers. A carefully prepared visit in August 1933 to the White Sea-Baltic Canal may have hidden the worst of the brutality from a group of 120 Russian writers and artists, the so-called Writers' Brigade, including Maxim Gorky, Alexei Nikolaevich Tolstoy, Viktor Shklovsky, and Mikhail Zoshchenko, who compiled a work in praise of the project, the 600-page The I.V. Stalin White Sea, Baltic Sea Canal, published at the end of 1934. Shklovsky visited the White Sea Canal on his own, rather than with the group. Gorky, who had previously visited the Solovetsky Islands labor camp in 1929 and written about it in the Soviet journal Our Accomplishments, organized the White Sea trip, but did not himself join it. Also along on the White Sea trip was Nikolai Pogodin, screenwriter of Convicts, a 1936 comedy about the Belbalt labor camp. It is likely that at least some of the visiting writers were aware of the brutality of camp life. In fact, one of the contributors, Sergei Alimov, was a prisoner at the camp and editor of the camp newspaper Perekovka, Reforging. Similarly, Alexander Avdenko's account of Belomor includes conversations between OGPU chief Semyon Firin and Prince Mirsky that reveal at least some of the writers were aware of its true nature. History of usage. In the 1930s, after the canal had been completed and opened for navigation, the Belbaltlag White Sea-Baltic Camp was reorganized into the White Sea-Baltic Combine, Baltisko, Belomorsky, Kombinat, still within the NKVD system, by an order of the Council of People's Commissars of August 17, 1933. The Combine was charged with operating the canal and managing the economic development of the adjacent areas, including 2.8 million hectares of forest lands and the industrial facilities that had been constructed along the route. A major part of the Combine's workforce consisted of 75 to 85,000 Belbaltlag prisoners. In addition, the Combine included 21 special settlements, Spetsposiolok, with some 30,000 residents, mostly dispossessed farm families transported to Karelia from the USSR's warmer regions. In addition to convicts and special settlers, the Combine employed about 4,500 free employees and a paramilitary security force. In all, the Combine's employees accounted for about 25% of the population of the Karelian Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic. Until 1936, all financial transactions of the Combine were exempt from taxes and duties. The BBK led to the development of Belomorsk as a major industrial city. New cities and urban-type settlements developed along the route of the canal, such as Medvezhegorsk, Segezha, Nadvoitsy. Povanets, which had been demoted from a town to a village in the 1920s, now became a town again, and a large port. As is discussed further below, during the 1930s, a number of smaller naval vessels were transferred from the Baltic to the White Sea to provide warships for the Soviet Northern Naval Flotilla, which became the Northern Fleet in 1937. In World War II, there was no action near the White Sea-Baltic Canal during the Winter War of 1939 to 1940, when the USSR invaded Finland. With Germany's full-scale invasion of the USSR in 1941, supported by Finland in the Continuation War, the canal route became the front line. On June 23, 1941, the day after the German invasion, 16 Finnish commandos were ferried to the canal by two German Heinkel He-115 seaplanes from Ulujärvi. The commandos were Finnish volunteers recruited by the German Major Schaller and were equipped with German uniforms and weapons, as the Finnish General Staff wanted no responsibility for the operation. The commandos were to blow up the canal locks, but they failed due to heightened security. On June 28th, the canal was bombed for the first time by the Finnish Air Force, targeting locks number 6, 7, 8, and 9, followed the next day by Finnish troops advancing along the Finland-USSR border. The air bombings of the Povanets lock ladder succeeded in interrupting boat traffic on the canal only from June 28th to August 6th, and then again from August 13th to 24th, 1941. On August 28, the fifth and final bombing raid of the 1941 navigation season took place against lock number 7, but it did no damage. In August, the management of the BBK and most of the 800 canal staff were evacuated from Medvezhegorsk to lock number 19 in Belomorsk, with only 80 left at their stations. In November, a caravan of passenger vessels evacuating families of Povanets canal workers and residents, along with equipment, froze into the ice of Lake Vigozero. On the night of November 12th to 13th, another boat caravan froze in Zaonezhsky Bay near Megostrov Island and was later captured by Finnish troops. On December 5th, Finnish troops entered Medvezhegorsk. On December 6th, in a minus 37 degrees Celsius frost, Finnish troops captured Povanets, the southern entrance to the BBK. On the same day, Soviet troops started demolishing canal structures. Lock number 1 was the first to be blown up. By the morning of December 8th, locks number 1 to 6 and dams number 4 and 20 had all been demolished. At the same time, heavy fighting took place near the Povanets lock ladder, locks number 1 to 7. The Finns crossed the canal and captured Gabselga village to the east, but after a few days of fighting, they were pushed back to the canal's western side. Soviet sappers blew up lock number 7 on December 11th after the Red Army had retreated. Once the locks of the Povanets ladder had been destroyed, water from the watershed lakes poured freely into Lake Onega through Povanets village, which was nearly completely destroyed by the flood. The route of the BBK had become the front line, separating the Finnish troops on the canal's western bank from the Soviet forces on its eastern bank. The opposing armies held these positions until June 1944. Post-war years. After Finland left the war in September 1944, the damage to the canal, including the complete destruction of its southern section and the town of Povanets, and damage to lighthouses and other structures, was repaired. Rebuilding was completed by July 1946, with navigation through the canal restored on July 28, 1946. On February 2, 1950, the RSFSR Council of Ministers issued an order for the overhaul and reconstruction of the BBK's structures, with gradual electrification of the canal's structures and machinery. In 1953, the lock's staff hired electricians. By 1957, the electrification of the locks of the northern slope was completed, and by 1959, all coastal and floating navigation lights were switched to electric power. The importance of BBK for the national economy greatly increased after the commissioning of the modern Volga-Baltic waterway in 1964. Canal capacity and the annual volume of freight traffic increased several-fold. Another upgrade took place in the 1970s. During the reconstruction, the guaranteed depth of the fairway was increased to 4 meters, and the channel became part of the unified deep water system of European Russia. Canal use. During the first navigation in 1933, 1.143 million tons of cargo and 27,000 passengers were transported through the canal. In 1940, traffic volume was approximately 1 million tons, representing 44% of capacity. Cargo tonnage peaked in 1985, with 7.3 million tons transported. Tonnage remained high until 1990, then declined after the fall of the Soviet Union. Usage rose gradually in the 21st century, but remained well below the Soviet-era peak, with just 0.3 million tons in 2002. During the 2007 season, the canal carried 0.4 million tons of cargo, along with 2,500 passengers. It is now operated by the White Sea and Lake Onega Waterways and Shipping Administration, which is also responsible for shipping on Lake Onega and in the Belomorsk harbor area, but not in the open waters of the White Sea. The canal was a small part of the agency's overall shipping business in 2007, which amounted to 4.6 million tons and 155,000 passengers. According to official statistics, a total of 193 million tons of cargo was transported over the canal over its first 75 years, 1933 to 2008. The canal makes it possible to ship heavy and bulky items from Russia's industrial centers to the White Sea, and then by seagoing vessels to Siberia's northern ports. For example, in the summer of 2007, a large piece of equipment for Rosneft's Siberian Vankor oil field was delivered by the Amur 1516 from Dzerzhinsk on the Oka River via the Volga-Baltic waterway and the White Sea Canal to Arkhangelsk, and from there by the ocean-going SA-15 class Arctic cargo ship Kapitan Danilkin to Dudinka on the Yenisei River. In 2011, heavy equipment for the Sayano-Shushenskaya hydropower plant was shipped from St. Petersburg via the canal, the Arctic Sea, and the Yenisei River. Oil product shipping. In Soviet times, the canal was used for shipping oil products from refineries on the Volga River to consumers in the Murmansk Oblast and overseas. Russia's Volga Tanker Company, with a fleet of suitably sized petroleum tankers and ore bulk oil carriers, pioneered this route starting August 1970, when Nefterudovoz III delivered a cargo of fuel oil to the White Sea port of Kandalaksha. After many years of interruption, Volga Tanker resumed the canal route in 2003. The company had plans to carry 800,000 tons of fuel oil over the canal during 2003 and to increase the volume to 1,500,000 tons, 1,653,000 short tons in 2004. The fuel was transferred from Volga Tanker river tankers to Latvian seagoing tankers at a floating transfer station near Osinki Island in the Onega Bay on the White Sea, 36 kilometers northwest of the port of Onega. Transfer operations began 24th June 2003, but on 1st September, a low-speed collision between Volga tankers Nefterudovoz 57M and the Latvian Zojadai during a transfer caused a crack in the Nefterudovoz's hull, with a subsequent oil spillage estimated at 45 tons 50 short tons, of which only 9 tons were recovered. Volga tanker's alleged failure to contain the spill resulted in the Arkhangelsk Oblast authorities shutting down the oil transfer operation, with only 220,000 tons exported. The company was fined and future operations were refused. Military use. Soviet and later Russian naval strategists long believed that a well-designed canal system could help establish contact among the separate fleets based on Russia's Black Sea, Baltic, Arctic, Pacific, and Caspian coasts. The White Sea Canal was also constructed with this military use in mind, and early in its history, the Northern Fleet's first warships sailed along the canal to the White Sea from the Baltic. Before World War II, the canal was used for the transfer of military vessels between the two seas on 17 occasions. During World War II, in August-September 1941, the canal was used to move a number of submarines from the Baltic Fleet to the White Sea, including submarines K3, S-101, and S-102, and L-22. Some unfinished submarines from Leningrad's Baltic shipyard and Gorky's Krasnoye Sormovo shipyard sailed to the new Sevmash shipyard in Severodvinsk. Since then, the canal has been regularly used for delivering submarines by transporter dock from the Baltic shipyard and Krasnoye Sormovo to Sevmash for completion. Hydroelectric stations. The canal system includes 5 hydroelectric power plants with total production capacity of 240 megawatts. Commemoration. The canal gave its name to the Belomorkanal Soviet cigarette brand. There is a monument at Povanets for the prisoners who perished during the construction, and a smaller memorial in Belomorsk near the White Sea end. There was even a comedic play written about the canal by Nikolai Pogodin. The canal project also gave the Russian language the slang word zeka, zek, zk, for inmate. In Russian, inmate, incarcerated, is zaključony, usually abbreviated to zk in paperwork, and pronounced as zeka, which gradually transformed into zek. The word is still in colloquial use. Originally, the abbreviation stood for zaključony, canal armyets, literally, incarcerated canal army man. According to the Soviet account, in 1932, when Anastas Mikoyan visited the Belomorskroy construction site, Lazar Kogan asked, "Comrade Mikoyan, what shall we call them?" I thought up the word, Kanalo Armyets. What do you think? Mikoyan approved,